guys, I hope you're doing well. I've gotten so many questions, and I'm sorry for not being able to personally respond to all of them about, oh, what are you making and why are you making that and what are you harvesting and those kind of things. And so today I thought, well, I was just making some elderberry goodies, that I would just make a quick video and show one thing at least that I enjoy doing with these guys. So here's all my elderberries. They have been frozen. That does a couple of things. For the main thing that I am doing it for in this instance is to make it easier to get the berries off of the stems. So elderberry foliage, stems, etc., the plant itself is poisonous and doesn't need to be scary or anything. It's not like if you get, you know, some little tiny stems in, it's going to be any problem whatsoever. Tomato plants, lots of plants of things that we eat are poisonous. So this is a pretty common thing in the plant world. But you do want to remove most of the stems, ideally. And just realizing I'm not in the shot with this, which might be interesting. But so you want to remove most of them, and when you get them fresh and then you try to pull them off either with your fingers or whatever, they tend to mush and really make a mess. And so which isn't a big deal, but it just is easier and tidier if you want it, and quicker, I think, because things aren't mushing and you don't have juice running and have to wipe your hands, etc. And they're just a lot easier to destem once they're frozen. The other thing is it sets the sugar, which if you harvest them after a good little frost, you'll notice that they're sweeter and they taste better. But throwing them in the freezer does pretty much the same thing. And then to get them off the stems, the easiest way I've found is with a hair pick. You can totally just do it with your fingers too and just kind of loosen them up. It just thaws them out a little bit more, and as you get going, you'll kind of they thaw quite quickly because they're small, and you can end up getting kind of messy and mushy too, whereas the comb just kind of lets you pick them off a little bit easier. So they're frozen, and of course there's lots of stuff you can do with elderberries: juicing them, making syrups, making tinctures, making jams or jellies. People even put them, you know, mix them with other fruits and put them in pies, etc. I throw them in with like huckleberry zucchini bread. Throw in, you know, a handful of elderberries with that, and they're great mixed in with those. You don't even, they don't have any negative impact whatsoever, and they actually add a pretty good sweet flavor, especially in addition to the huckleberries in a bread like that. But what I'm making today, right this moment, is honey, an elderberry honey, which is actually fermented. And honey is a fantastic medium for fermentation because it has so much good bacteria in it and is obviously full of sugar. And so the sugar content prevents it from growing mold and most of the negative bacteria that we want to avoid. And but the good bacteria help the fermentation process along. And the elderberries also, at least for the blue elder, which is what we have mostly around here, back east, the black elder berries are a lot more common. But with these guys, this powdery kind of white coating that looks like frost, it's actually not frost from the freezer. They looked like this when I put them in. This is actually yeast that's on the outside of the berries, which is the same for huckleberries or, you know, any of the fruits that have kind of a white powdery coating on them, even like Italian prunes and some plums and different things. That's all a naturally occurring yeast that's on them. So they tend and lean very, very well towards fermentation. So people will make elderberry wine, you know, even vinegars, just all kinds of fun things like that. Well, I'm not a super big wine drinker. It doesn't sit really well with my stomach, and it's just not. Sometimes, I mean, I would love a glass once in a while, but not very often. So I'm not huge into. I've never done winemaking, mostly just because I don't enjoy drinking it enough to go into winemaking. But the fermentation process can be really amazing for gut health and bacteria and good flora, especially if you're using local honey to do it with, which helps your immune system and helps allergies and antihistamines. The fermentation can be amazing for stuff like allergies and as an antihistamine also. So with fermented honey, this is about the easiest, which is why I wanted to make a video on this. This is about the easiest possible recipe, in my opinion, that you could make. If you know nothing about, you know, harvesting wild stuff or herbalism or elderberries or canning or anything like that, you can totally make this. A college student in their dorm room could make this. Just run out to, you know, the forest, wherever they like to hike, and grab a few clusters of elderberries, throw them in their freezer if they had a little, you know, mini freezer, and the next day you're ready to go. Or you don't even have to freeze them. You can totally use them fresh. In this recipe particularly, the sweetness factor is not an issue, so freezing them to set the sugars and make them more palatable really doesn't matter because of the honey content. It's so sweet anyways that the elderberries aren't gonna, it's not gonna be a big deal. I just like it because it's easier to handle them when they're frozen. So now that I got a few destemmed, we'll go ahead and start working on this. So I'm doing a 1/2 gallon jar here because I'm doing a whole bunch of it, and I like layering it in. If you look online, you can probably find, I don't know how much stuff there is. I should have looked and seen what kind of recipes were around, but some people say, you know, fill your jar when making fermented honeys like this. The advice is fill your jar with berries and then pour the honey over the top. Especially if you're using frozen berries, I don't find that works very well because it just solidifies the honey, and it takes a really long time to pour over the entire jar. So what I like to do is layer them, even if it's not, even if the berries weren't frozen, I like to layer them anyways, just because it helps get everything mixed up faster. I didn't pull my honey over here. So get the first layer of elderberries in there, and you could do this with other berries too. This is not elderberry specific, but having a fermented elderberry honey is, I mean, it's just, you can use it just like a syrup. You can use it as a food. So like on pork chops, or, you know, whatever you have in tea. That's one of my absolute favorites, is using it in tea. So I just layered a bit of honey. You can see it's not even. It doesn't matter. All of this is going to totally get mixed up, and it's going to be juicy and delicious. So it does not need to be mixed per se, or even at all. It just proportionally. I just want it mixed in well. So we're just going to continue like that, and put some berries in, and put another layer of honey, put some berries, put another layer of honey, and keep going until we're about 3/4 of the way full, or a little bit more is fine. But we want to leave some room because it can bubble up as it starts fermenting. It'll get bubbly, and it can bubble up. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't, but it can bubble up and make a mess, and we'd like to avoid that if possible. So this will turn into kind of a type of alcohol, so you wouldn't like want to drink, you know, a whole cup of it or anything, because it doesn't taste like alcohol. It's so sweet and delicious and yummy. And so but instead of a tincture, it works really well. Like if you were, because some people get a little freaked out about the alcohol side, and I just like to remind, but if you're taking a tincture, it's going to be alcohol most often anyways. So you're not taking much. You're taking a spoonful, you know, or two, or you're adding it to a cup of tea, and any alcohol will evaporate off in a nice hot boiling cup of tea if you want that to happen. But it's also really yummy, like drizzled over ice cream, or just, you know, it's just yummy. It tastes like a delicious berry infused honey. It does not, for anyone who has had a bad experience with elderberries and had nasty tasting elderberry juice, which believe me, especially depending on the year, it can be pretty nasty. I think it tastes like vomit when it's a bad year. It's just that kind of acrid taste in the back of your mouth afterwards. It's almost good for a minute, and then it's not. And then some good years, you know, you can have really sweet, delicious berries that you don't even hardly realize are medicine. But this way, it doesn't really matter whether your berries are delicious or not so delicious. The honey seems to turn out pretty good no matter which way. So, all right, so my camera turned off on me, and I don't know quite where it turned off. But once you get your jar layered up as much as you would like, as full as you need it, then you can cap it and turn it upside down and let everything just flow together, and turn it once or twice a day if you can. And you need to burp it as well, which is just open it up and let it breathe so that it doesn't build up a bunch of pressure inside of your jar and then make a mess when you do open it, which can happen. So just letting the pressure off a little bit. And it usually takes, I mean, depending on your weather, how warm it is, all of the above, it can take up to a week for it to start, you know, really needing to be burped or anything at all. But keeping it turned so that the berries get coated in honey every day is really important and will help move things along. And then you don't have to refrigerate it. Actually, it'll last for probably, you know, at least a year, but it can last for longer. I'm sure. I've never had it that long, but if you have any worries, you can just store it in the refrigerator. But it's a great immune boosting. The other thing I like to do is after they sit and aren't frozen for a while and are mixed in with the honey really well, I like to mash them just a little bit, just to release a little bit more of the juices and stuff into the honey. But the sugar is a great extractor, and it really does pull the juices out well. So I'm going to grab this jar here. So this is a jar, let me screw the lid on so I don't spill it, that I had. This has been going for about a week now, and this is what it looks like here. You can see all of the honey, and it's much more liquidy because the juice of the berries are mixing with the honey, so it gets much easier to mix as time goes on. And eventually you'll start seeing little bitty bubbles, which is the fermenting going on. But for now, it's just extracting and kind of almost making a honey tincture until it starts to ferment, which is great. I mean, I'm giving it to my son by the spoonful right now. He had a little bit of a sore throat. And it's just a great little herbal honey, you know, well, herbal elderberry honey, until it starts fermenting. So that's what it will look like later. And then I just turn it upside down and let all the berries slowly fall to the bottom, and then turn it back up and loosen the lid and leave it loose. You want to store it in a cool, dark place, ideally, and let it brew for at least a week before you start, you know, eating too much of it usually, but it doesn't really matter. You can eat it whenever you want and just keep adding honey to this for a little while. But at least 6 weeks can make really amazing honey. But anytime in between, you don't have to wait that long. You don't have to be that patient. You can have it at any point. And then strain it out. You don't have to. You can leave it together, but I recommend straining it out just to keep it have the best chance of staying preserved for the longest amount of time, especially if you're not eating a lot of it at once and consuming a lot of it. So that's pretty much it for the fermented elderberry honey. If anyone has any questions, you can totally leave them in the comments below. I will do my best to answer them, but I do get a lot of questions, so I can't always get to all of them, and I really apologize for that. But hopefully this was a little fun to have a little peek into my world and one of the things I like doing with these particular berries. And I hope you're all doing well, and until next time, I will talk to you then. Happy growing!